of Americans, according to those Americans polled by CBS news organization, are now in favor of an impeachment inquiry. So, what's the obstacle stopping even more Americans with getting on board? Because there's a sizable majority of Democrats, 25% of Republicans, and 49% of independent voters, as statistically derived from those who were polled. I want to say racism, that racism is the motivating factor for people who adhere to a worldview that says Trump is necessary and that Trump's actions are excusable. And I've just seen the breaking news that Amber Geiger has been found guilty of murder in relation to shooting an unarmed black man who was eating ice cream on his sofa because she claimed to have mistaken his apartment for her own, and she just barged into his house and shot him. And that's a step forward, but I see people of color on Twitter saying, I long for the day when justice is not a surprise. And I want to relate this to something else I see, which is a white commentator on Twitter saying, it's easy to forget that a tweet like this, which is just a standard, not even notable Trump tweet, is evidence alone that he is utterly deranged. And it's Trump tweeting out a Breitbart impeachment poll where 97% of the respondents say they support Trump. So yes, it's arguable that Trump is deranged when he tweets out a Breitbart poll as evidence that he's well liked. But you know what? That's a white attitude to say Trump is crazy. It's the more urgency we attach to Trump's fascist-style rule, the more we would notice that Trump's pattern of behavior is not merely deranged. It is a cold, calculated push to hold on to power. It is a cold, calculated move to present his fan base as having legitimacy, to frame his opposition as lacking legitimacy. That's not deranged. It's a fascist approach. And maybe it's easier for me to understand it because I'm from a Jewish background and my family members were murdered by Nazis. So I'm with a lot of other Jewish people in America who consider Trump to be a clear and present danger to American democracy and the stability of American society. We have more of an intuitive understanding what hate looks like when it sets out to destroy other groups and to endow itself with some kind of artificial, confected validity. So yes, Trump pushes a Breitbart poll as evidence of his popularity, when Breitbart is an extremist population that is very racist. When we call that deranged or ridiculous, we ignore the truth that Trump's base are racists. The people who ignore evidence of Trump's criminality and misconduct are racist and cannot engage with factual details because of their racism. They've got the same kind of fact pattern blindness that Amber Geiger had when she barged into somebody's house and shot somebody because they were black. And she felt allowed to do that. Her instincts guided her to say, yep, a black person, I'm entitled to shoot them. Her series of unconscionable decisions in choosing to ignore her surroundings, ignore the fact that it was clearly not her apartment, is arranged in an entirely different way and decorated in an entirely different way. But she saw blackness and she needed to kill it. Gosh, that sounds like quite a extreme pronouncement that I just made. But do you know who it feels even more extreme to? The family of Botham Jean, who had to deal with their son, their family member, their relative murdered in his own home by a woman whose racism led her to feel so entitled to take their son's life that she could just march into his home and shoot him. Without cause, without aggressive action, shoot somebody eating a bowl of vanilla ice cream on their sofa whilst watching television in their own home. And people were pretty upset when the judge ruled that the Castle Doctrine could be considered. The Castle Doctrine is a stand your ground law that says you are free to protect your home if you feel it's under threat. And people were like, what? White people are allowed to tell, a jury is allowed to consider that a white person might feel entitled to believe that anything is their castle? White people just own everything, even your own house, and they can act under the protection of a law designed to protect their actions in their own home. But mi casa, su casa es mi casa, your house is my house, might have been true for white people if the jury had not found her guilty. And they found her guilty, and I'm amazed. And I can see how saddening it would be for people of color that people are amazed that she was found guilty by a jury, unanimously. I wonder how Trump's going to react, if he will mention it. I wonder how Trump supporters will react. That's not strictly relevant, though. If we're going to look at what's important in the big picture right now, Mike Pompeo, State Secretary Mike Pompeo, has just come out and announced that he is going to actively obstruct the impeachment inquiry by forbidding his staff members in the State Department to testify before the impeachment inquiry. They'll add that to the articles of impeachment against Trump, that his staff are actively sabotaging the inquiry's ability to proceed. But that's their gamble, isn't it? They're all in with fascism and breaking American laws and obstructing justice in plain sight, because they got away with it in the Mueller report. Trump obstructed justice as hard as he could, and Mueller felt too constrained to be able to denounce that fact pattern of obstruction of justice, multiple acts of obstruction of justice, with a saying that his hands were tied. And he was very limp in his response to William Barr, who misrepresented the findings and the description of events in the Mueller report. All of the obstructive acts with their various components of proximity to an inquiry. So an act of obstruction is constituted obstruction when you know that there's an inquiry happening. So you're actively trying to hide things from the people conducting the inquiry. 1,000 federal prosecutors signed their name to a letter, a public letter published on Medium, saying if any other person had committed the acts described in the Mueller report, they would be facing a jail sentence. They would be facing a court system, and they would be indicted for obstruction of justice. Racism has prompted too many Americans to ignore the pattern of economic recovery under President Obama. Racism has caused too many Americans to discount the improvements made to the employment rate to stimulate the economy, etc. Racism has prompted too many Americans to give credit to Donald Trump for fixing the American economy when all he's done is coast on a trajectory that was well established before he came to power. Racism has prompted Americans to ignore the clear signs of impending recession now, in the comfortable belief that Trump is somehow a good economic manager because he's whiter than Barack Obama and he's less devoted to social justice than Barack Obama, and he talks a lot of noise about how reducing regulation serves to help the American people, when in reality, reducing regulation, whilst intuitively helping businesses, acts to destroy the lives of American consumers. So in the long term, acts to destroy the American economy, a path that is hastened by Trump's attack on American trade. So his sabotage of the livelihood of American farmers, his introduction of tariffs that are affecting the profit margins of American importers who are importing goods from China, has hit the hip pockets of American consumers who might not have noticed yet as the tariffs raise the prices for goods imported from China, for white goods, for toys, for other things, but will eventually add to the precarity of the financial position that an increasing number of Americans find themselves in. And one metric of how well Americans are doing in the current economy is that the rate of car repossession has hit an all-time high. So more Americans are losing their cars because they can't meet repayments. That's a key sign of dysfunction in the American economy. Things going wrong, and the media being reluctant to report on that because nobody wants to be the bad guy who exacerbates the trajectory towards a recession by pointing it out, so that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where people start saving and stop spending because they know a recession is coming. So nobody wants to call out an impending recession. These things are always much more known and discussed amongst experts than they are discussed by experts in the public arena. So privately, experts know there's a recession coming. They're not going to tell you necessarily because it's too great a risk to put your hand up and be the bad guy, contributing to recession by drawing people's attention to how one lies ahead. But I have no such qualms, and I'm pointing it out to America because Australia's already in that position. Our government is already lying to us about the state of the economy and the economic figures, and our Reserve Bank governor has had to come out and say, yep, we're lowering interest rates to their lowest level ever, and the Treasurer is not being honest. Maybe I should try and look up the specific words. Let's see. That our Treasurer has said. Oh, a quote. Treasurer Frydenberg was disingenuous at best or simply lied. And that's what Trump will keep doing to Americans as well. Trump and all his enabling fascist lackeys in the White House, they'll keep denying that that a recession is happening until it becomes unavoidable, at which point they will find a scapegoat to blame. They will say it's China's fault, or they'll point to a global recession that Trump has helped cause by depressing levels of global trade, by sabotaging trading relationships between not only Americans and China, but also between America and Europe, between America and... Well, Trump was considering even... sorry about that, I need a tissue. Oh well, I'll just go in a sec. I need sleep more than I need a tissue. But yes, Trump is affecting a terrible relationship on the world economy, and the effects of it have a delayed manifestation. So some of those effects are visible. People can't meet their car repayments. Temporary temp hire statistics have taken a steep nosedive since September the 1st, when Trump introduced or implemented the latest round of tariffs against China, against Chinese imported goods. And Beijing retaliated with tariffs on American imported goods from America to China. But let's have a look. Okay, what has the Reserve Bank governor said about Australia? The governor's statement effectively called out as a lie the Morrison-Frydenberg chant of strong economy for the last year. Central banks don't cut the interest rates in strong economies to nothing or beyond. Central banks don't consider printing money and handing it out in a strong economy. Sharp-eyed economist, the person who spotted an unscripted August comment by Dr. Lowe admitting that cheap money is creating future problems by pushing up asset prices, was quick to highlight, oh, well, this is too complicated for me to understand, let alone communicate. But the foreign exchange market got the message immediately. Down went the Australian dollar. So that's your future, America. A government which is going to keep lying to you about how the economy is doing until it's more undeniable than it is now. But you should note that the economic indicators that are flashing red are a fall in the price of copper, meaning there's less demand for copper, and copper is a mineral that is used predominantly in housing and construction. The price of gold is going up, another economic indicator flashing red to you, saying investors can see that there's economic uncertainty ahead and they're taking refuge in buying gold, which is habitually a safe bet for investors when currencies become too unreliable, because the US dollar might go down in value. So that's what the price of gold rising indicates. It indicates afraid investors who have their ears to the ground. What's another indicator? The yield curve inverting, when long-term US Treasury bonds have to drop their interest rates to investors because too many investors are seeking to invest money in 10-year government bonds. too many investors are excited to lock their money away for 10 years. And that's because too many of them are avoiding 2-year investment bonds because they think the 2-year prognosis for the economy is not that great. And they'd prefer their money to be safer in a 10-year bond, which is why demand went up for 10-year US Treasury bonds, and the interest rates, the yield on a 10-year and government bond had to fall in order to be able to pay all of that flood of 10-year